The other day, I was having a conversation with somebody and there was a stain on the floor, and we were talking in Spanish, and I told this person that the stain era de una forma bastante fálica, which is to say that the shape of the stain was rather phallic. It was kind of in that shape, and I was thinking about it in the moment. I didn't actually know how to say phallic in Spanish because that's not a word that I pretty much ever use in English, and definitely not in Spanish. In my 3 years of learning Spanish, I don't think that I've ever used the word fálico or fálica. But in the moment, I intuited it, and I just guessed that that was how to say it, was fálica in the moment. And it worked. I was understood, I made myself clear, and then I looked it up later in a dictionary, and yes, that is how you say it. And it was kind of the inspiration for making this video, because in the moment I was able just to intuit what the word would be. And you can do this all the time, especially once you start to pick up on the patterns of Spanish vocabulary. And really the big through line for how you can intuit words like this is whether or not the word originally comes from Latin, or really like Old Greek before Latin, but mainly Latin. A lot of our words come from like Old Hellenistic Greek and then into Latin, and from Latin straight to Spanish, sort of, and then from Latin through French into English. And when we can recognize the patterns of which words come from Latin, it makes it extremely easy to intuit words and how to say them in Spanish, because there's some very, very consistent rules, with exceptions, but with relatively few exceptions. And so I made a little chart here that is, I hope, easy to see. I'll try to make it easy to see, but I just want to go through these here because it will help you to learn patterns that you can use to intuit words without having to look them up in a dictionary. And I'm not going to say that these rules are 100% consistent all the time. If you follow the rule consistently, eventually you are going to make mistakes because all of these rules have few exceptions. I'm going to cover a few at the bottom here. But probably like 90 to 95% of the time, if you just follow the pattern and guess, you're probably going to get it right. So the first one is the one that I was just talking about, which is, in my case, it was the word phallic. Let me bring this up here. It was phallic, and I guessed in the moment that it was fálico, but I said in the moment, de una forma fálica. So forma is feminine, so it goes from fálico to be fálica. I'm talking a lot about fálico. The rule here is basically that if an adjective ends in IC, it's probably going to be the same thing from English into Spanish, but it's just going to end in ICO or ICA. ICO if it's a masculine, if it's describing a masculine noun, and ICA if it's describing a feminine noun. I kind of wrote that here with the little @ sign, just to show that it can be O or A, based on masculine or feminine. So like basic becomes básico, cosmic becomes cósmico, tragic becomes trágico, phallic becomes fálico, magic becomes mágico. Note this one here, magic, it's only the adjective form. This would not apply if we were talking about the noun magic. Like, to perform magic is not the same thing as a person who is magic. The adjective form of magic follows this rule, but the noun version does not. More on that one later. The other things that you can notice here, that's probably immediately obvious, is that we're not spelling these exactly the same. Spanish has very consistent phonetic rules in orthography, and so you can't do a PH in Spanish to make the F sound. This comes from Old Greek, and we have it in English, but we don't get it in Spanish, so it's going to be fálico. It just switches that way. Spanish tends to prioritize the sound of a word over the pronunciation. But that doesn't make sense. The sound of a word over the spelling of a word, I should say. And when it's getting it from an original source, in Spanish, you'll learn that it tends to prioritize how it sounds and will very readily adapt how the word is spelled to how it sounds rather than the other way around. So for instance, the letter A, the vowel A in Spanish cannot sound like a, it can only sound like a. And one of my friends who from Colombia, her name is Lady, like the word lady from English. It was adapted from English, but they don't spell it. She didn't. Her parents rather did not spell it Lady, but instead Leidy, lady. Side note. You'll also notice too that in this example, there is a tilde, an accent mark, above the first syllable of each of these words. And it's because, very conveniently for Spanish learners coming from English, the syllable that you pronounce, that you stress rather, is going to be the same. So basic, básico, cosmic, cósmico, not cósmico, not cosmic, not cósmico, cósmico. Makes it very convenient for us. You'll also notice too, of course, that we are changing the pronunciation. We're not saying basic and then basico, it's básico, because like I said before, there's no A sound. Every vowel in Spanish has only one pronunciation. Okay, next category, might as well just do the IC here. Remember, this one is IC for adjectives, and this one is IC for nouns. So we have a different rule here. IC, when it's a noun, is going to end up usually being ICA, with very little exception. Logic, I kind of said that in a Spanish accent, logic becomes lógica, ethics becomes ética, music becomes música. In other notes here, we don't have TH in Spanish. It's just gonna be changed from ethics to ética, just with a T. There is sort of a voiced TH sound in Spanish, but it's represented, written by the letter D. But we don't have any, you're not gonna see written down TH, except for every now and then in names, for whatever reason. Like sometimes you'll meet people named like Juliet, but they put an H at the end. But in more like mainstream words that have a consensus around them, you're not going to find TH in there. Anything else important? Oh, you can notice the same thing, that the first syllable is getting stressed in all of these. So again, makes it very convenient for us Spanish learners coming from English, because if you say logic, well, it's said logic, not logic, logic. And so I know already which syllable I need to stress in Spanish. Very convenient for us. Anything else important there? Oh yeah, one more important thing with this one here. For the nouns, this one will not apply to the adjectives, but for the nouns, if you find words like this that come from the Latin root IC, and subsequently not subsequently, but comparatively in Spanish and in ICA, these words are basically always going to be feminine. Like off the top of my head, I can't think of an example of a word in Spanish that ends in ICA that is masculine. I'll think about it, but I don't think that there is one. So you can very safely assume that something that ends in ICA like this is going to be feminine. La lógica, la ética, la música. Up next, we have ology. Get closer. Ology is a good one. It's very easy to learn. You're just going to switch it for ología, biología, psicología, geología, astrología, etymología. Had to include that one, of course. Similarly to the ICA, all of the words in Spanish that end in this gia, ología, are going to be feminine, always. La biología, la psicología, la geología. Same thing as before, we have to maintain normal Spanish spelling rules. So we're not going to have the H in psychology, psicología, because that H is not going to be providing anything. We don't say psicología, and a CH in Spanish will always be ch. There's no silent H after a C. And then we change the Y in psicología to be an I, because unlike in English, Y cannot represent a vowel in Spanish, only a consonant. Cool, that one is pretty easy. Next one up here is going to be ism, suffix in English ism. changing to ismo, and then in the same vein, ist, ist to ista. So capitalism or capitalist becomes capitalismo and capitalista. Racismo, racista. Turismo, turista. Realismo, realista. Interesting thing here, tourism drops the OU in tourism because in Spanish there's no OU diphthong, like it doesn't do anything, you just switch it to U. If you know the song off the new Bad Bunny album, Turista, you probably recognize this one, there's no O in there either. This one does not have a similar gender role to the other two noun rules that we learned already, because these things often represent people, and so the gender is going to match the person about whom you're speaking. So turista could be la turista or el turista, but if you do el turista or la turista, it's still going to end in the ISTA. We don't have to change the final letter, the final vowel. Also, interesting thing, kind of an example of one of the exceptions we're talking about. Realista can mean a realist as a noun, but it can also mean the adjective realistic. You would think realistic would actually belong here, but this is an example of one of the few exceptions that we do have. There's no word realístico, which you would think would be in this one here. It actually just ends up being realista as an adjective as well. So if you want to say something, not a person is a realist, but rather a thing, something is realistic, you would say realista. Esa película es muy realista. That movie is very realistic. But you wouldn't say esa película es muy realística, because realístico is not a word in the Spanish consensus. Up next, let's do this one is a fun one. ty at the end of a word as a suffix, let me get the glare out of there, will become dad. Dad. Ty will become dad. Libertad. Majestad. Crueldad. Crueldad. I kind of mispronounced that. Liberty, majesty, cruelty. Pretty self-explanatory there. Don't have to spend too much time on it. Next one we have ity. Similarly to this, it's the same idea, except you just put the I in front of it. Ity becomes idad. So we have actividad, nacionalidad, electricidad, moralidad. And then I included this one because it's kind of an interesting distinction that you do have to learn in Spanish. In English, I have right here, calidad and cualidad. The only difference being this extra U that's included here. In English, we use the noun quality to refer to the quality of a thing, like good properties that it has. And we also use quality to reference those exact properties. So like a shoe can be high quality, or I can say to you, one of your best qualities is honesty, right? We use the same word, but in Spanish, you actually have to distinguish those two ideas, the quality of something or a quality belonging to something. Calidad references quality as in the quality of a shoe. Ese zapato es de calidad muy alta. That shoe is very high quality. But you could also say, una de tus cualidades mejores es la honestidad. One of your best qualities is honesty. Cualidad with the U included in there. Calidad, cualidad. Up next we have ATE verbs. So that's verbs in English whose infinitive form end in ATE. A very easy rule of thumb to learn automatically a lot of verbs with relatively little exception, but some exception, is that if it ends in ATE, it's probably going to be spelled the same way. Minding Spanish spelling rules, we do have to change them, but it's going to be spelled and pronounced in a similar way. But instead of ending in ATE, it's going to be just a normal AR verb. So some examples. You've probably learned crear, to create, precipitar, to precipitate, investigar, contemplar, mandar. You probably know mandar, especially if you are focusing yourself on Mesoamerican Spanish being like Central American and Mexican Spanish, because if you say something to like Mexicans or people from other Central American countries and they don't understand you right away, they might say mande, and that's because coming from this verb mandar, which is very similar to mandate something, but it's also used to mean something which, an idea which in English we would probably represent as like to order or to command as well. And so when you hear somebody say mande, it means because they change the A at the end to an E because they're calling you usted, even if they don't necessarily mean to. Even if they call you normally tú, for whatever reason, it just became kind of an expression where when people use that particular verb to ask somebody to repeat themselves, it just switches to usted for some reason, mande, because in the imperative form of conjugating verbs, if you are calling somebody usted, you switch the vowel at the end. So AR verbs end in an E, and ER and IR verbs end in an A, but that can be a different video. That's just where mande comes from, mandar. And then delegar, just another example, to delegate, of course. All of these would end in an ATE. Do I have any examples of... Here, I don't actually have any examples. I should have included one where the spelling changes a little bit. It doesn't happen too often, but sometimes it will happen where you have to just mildly adjust the spelling for Spanish orthographic rules. Up next, we have the suffix tion, and it just becomes cion. And very importantly, there's going to be a tilde, an accent mark over that final O has to be there. I don't think there's any examples of it not being there. Nación, información, celebración, precipitación. Probably pretty self-explanatory. Don't have to go too in depth in there. Up next, we have a similar rule. If it's the suffix ssion in English, it's going to end in sion, importantly with the tilde on top of the O. Extensión, comprensión, compasión. This one does not follow the similar rule as the IC words, where the stressed syllable is kind of going to carry over from English to Spanish. You have to adjust it to being that last syllable. Even though in English we say information, we stress the third syllable, we have to stress the O in información, not información like information, información. You have to do that. That's all of the rules that I have here. I'm going to now show some exceptions to those rules. There's actually a lot more suffixes that come from Latin, like a ton. There's so many out there. And so I could probably do another video if maybe I get like 2 likes, one from Willow and one from Chase on this video. Maybe I'll do another one. But let's go over some just kind of exceptions to know. This is not all the exceptions, of course, but just to kind of demonstrate the idea that there are exceptions and you can't follow these rules 100%. Magia. Magia means magic as a noun. Remember, we covered before magic as an adjective, and it follows this pattern, but you can't say mágico to say like magic as a noun. It's actually magia. And it's also a better way to express that is that it also doesn't follow the noun rule of IC. It doesn't become mágica. It's actually just magia. Relacionar. This is a verb that means to relate. If the word relate followed this kind of pattern, it would be relar, according to the ATE to AR rule, but it doesn't for whatever reason. It's just relacionar. The word translate, also, that verb does not follow the same ATE rule. We don't say translar, we actually say traducir. The noun loyalty is not loyaltad. That's not a word in Spanish. It actually becomes lealtad. I don't know why. Leal, I think, is just a different like Latin root. Poverty does not become poverdad, like you would think if we follow our DAD rules, but rather it just becomes pobreza. This one, ateo, is a kind of interesting one because in a certain sense it does follow this rule up here. Ateo means atheist. If you say atheism, it actually follows this rule of the ISM. It becomes ateísmo. Ateísmo, you just drop the H, ateísmo. However, if you want to say atheist, you don't say ateísta for whatever reason. I don't know how that happened, but for whatever reason, we say ateo, just for the personal noun of it. This one you've probably heard many times. Perhaps you were even thinking of it when we went over the DAD rule. The word city does not follow this DAD rule. It doesn't become ciudad. For whatever reason, you add this U in there, ciudad, just that extra U. Localizar means to locate, does not follow the ATE rule. It's not locar, it's localizar. Bautismo, kind of a fun one. Bautismo, in English we say baptism, and to say a Baptist we say, we say Baptist, but in Spanish we say bautista. So we just drop that P in those two words, and we add a U rather. Bautismo, Bautista. You've probably heard the last name Bautista. Or to say John the Baptist in Spanish, you would say Juan el Bautista, but not Baptista. The P just vanished. Well, it probably was never there and we added it. I don't actually know. This one is an interesting one. Hindu. When we talk about Hinduism, you can follow the rule, Hinduismo. You just make the H silent, but it's still included in the spelling of the word Hinduismo. However, you would not say Hinduista, a Hinduist, in the same way as in English. You would not say that, you would just say Hindu. Hope that helps. If I get 2 whole likes on this video, one from Willow, one from Chase, I'll make a follow-up for a bunch of other suffixes that you can learn these rules to as well.